Hi, and welcome to winemastery.co.uk. My name's John Lightfoot. This is
Julia Trustram-Eve from Wines of Great Britain. Sorry, did you want me to do that?
No, that's fine. And this is
Martin Falk from Three Quires.
Thank you very much. So, as you can see with the beautiful background, I'm in Gloucestershire. Well, you can't see that, I guess, from the background, but I'm in Gloucestershire, but I am in the middle of a vineyard here, the Three Quires vineyard. Thank you, Martin, very much for hosting this interview. Thank you very much. So we're here to talk about English wine, and so I've got two experts, one that's actually doing it, and Julia is an expert in terms represents the GB Wine, which is the Wine Growers Trade Association. Would that be the?
That's right. Yeah, it's a trade association for the vineyards and wineries of England and Wales.
And Wales.
Yep.
And that's why it's called GB rather than...
Absolutely. Wines of Great Britain.
Wines
Exactly.
of Great Britain, fantastic. So Julia obviously meets a lot of vineyards, knows exactly what's going on in the English world. So I thought it'd be an idea for us to... We obviously talk, John and I obviously talk a lot about different wines from all over the world, and we rarely get the opportunity to talk about English wine. One of the reasons I wanted to do this is I know that in the past, and I'll probably get it sorted from both sides here, in the past, English wine has had a bad rep because it's not been considered to be very good. I believe that's changed. Would we agree that's changed?
Oh, definitely. Most certainly. And actually over quite a long period of time. And we've been working in the industry for quite a while, Martin, haven't we?
We have indeed,
Yeah.
yes. And I am a little bit defensive when people say it didn't used to be very good. I think that it's a style that's now come into fashion far more. And I think undoubtedly with the expertise that's come into the industry, our wines are improving.
So in terms of is that down to the change? Is that down to the experience of the vineyards, or is it down to climate change, or why do you think that it's changing? Was it just the fact that are you suggesting that people's tastes have changed to come more in sync with English wine?
I think there's certainly an element of that. When we first started here in the 70s and early 80s, everybody was looking for big, heavy wines, and it was a real problem to sell anything English to the British public, whether it was apples, and we were all eating golden delicious apples rather than English cocks, and now it's completely reversed. People are looking for lighter wines with slightly more fruit driven styles, low carbon footprint. Everything that we're doing here fits the marketplace.
But I think that the certainly just in the normal press and in the trade press, people journalists are talking about the fact that climate change is changing, and now actually we're producing sparkling wine that actually rivals champagne, and in actual fact in another 50 years probably they won't be as good as us because of climate change or because of our experience. Is that part of the reason as well, do you think?
I think the early stages of English wine production was very much geared towards still wine with a Germanic style, and the sparkling revolution only really started to happen in the late 80s and early 90s, and the industry's learnt a huge amount over that last 20 years, and now the southeast especially are producing fantastic champagne style sparkling wines that stand up in their own right.
And in terms of the wine production, is it a lot of vineyards are in the southeast? Is that typically in the southeast, or does it spread over the rest of the?
Well, we've now got vineyards actually in, I think, every single county of England, and we've got vineyards in North and South Wales as well. But the concentration is very much in the southeast because, as Martin said, that's where a really large amount of growth has happened, principally because of the traditional method, sparkling wines, and of course planting those traditional varieties, so that Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. And back in the 70s, 80s when Three Quires started, for example, and actually much of the rest of the English wine industry at the time, producing those lighter styles of still wines particularly, has changed enormously, because over 50% of what we grow now is Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And is that 50%? You're saying that sort of over GB, but is it even more concentrated? If you looked at just the southeast, would the percentage be higher there, do you think?
The percentage is much higher there, but actually you've now got sparkling wines being produced right across the south of England, and actually, well, in fact in all parts of England up to Yorkshire. There's some wonderful sparkling wine in Yorkshire as well.
Really?
Yep, not from the traditional varieties, but I think sparkling wine is a style that I think a lot of people have really recognised England as producing some fantastic quality. And as Martin said, that started in the late 80s, early 90s. I'm sure many people will know the name Nye Timber, which is a Sussex winery. They've got vineyards in Sussex and Hampshire and Kent now, but they were the ones that went into competitions with 100% Chardonnay sparkling wine, and it took the world by storm, and we've never looked back, really.
No, absolutely. And just coming back to the grapes, obviously we mentioned the grapes that everyone has heard of, but when English wine first started, because maybe the conditions are a little bit more hardy, especially towards the north of England, do we use different grapes? The grapes that are not particularly typical in sort of France or Italy or Spain, are they sort of almost unique to our environment, or?
Yes, well, certainly we use cool climate varieties, but there's not just the variety. You then have the rootstocks and the clones that have all been developed over years. Germany especially have been great allies for us in pushing the boundaries of grape growing. They're net importers of wine, and so it's in their interests to develop varieties that work in cooler climates. And we've learned a lot and sort of benefited from that. And you have that running alongside a little bit of global warming, and it's made things far more interesting in far more areas in the country.
Okay. And talking of that then, I didn't realise that, because in Germany, whenever I've been in Germany, I've only on the shelf seen German wines, and of course traditionally in England you hardly see, and especially in the supermarkets, you hardly see any English wine. How easy is it to get hold of English wine these days?
Well, an awful lot easier than you might think now. I mean, it's certainly true to say 20 years ago or so it was a lot harder, but I think I'm right in saying every single supermarket now in the country lists an English wine. Of course, you can buy a lot of the wine from supermarkets online as much as in store, and you know, mail order and independent wine merchants as well. And we've got to remember as well, though, that we've seen enormous growth in this industry. I think in the last 10 years or so, we've seen, you know, the amount of hectares that are planted with grapes about double.
Really?
And since the year 2000, it's actually trebled. So we're seeing a huge amount of growth at the moment, but we're still a very, very small wine producing region. And so you can't just have lots of end of aisle shelves sort of stocked with English wines. That having been said, in some parts of the country, there are some very supportive merchants and supermarkets that will really position English wine. So it's always worth going out there, asking for them, having a look for them. Restaurants, hotels as well, definitely worth asking for them. I think you see them creeping more and more onto the list now, which is great. And of course, one thing which is really great is you can actually come and visit a vineyard, and you can taste and buy the wine direct from the vineyard, which is great, so you get the whole experience.
Yeah, in fact, I think you do tours here, Martin.
We do tours, yes. We have restaurant and hotel rooms, and tourism has always been a very important part of what we do. And right from the first plantings in 73 and the first vintage in 76, we've sold probably 25 to 30% of our production directly from the vineyard, and that's a very important part of the success of the business.
Yeah. And I guess one of the other things that strikes me about sort of the English wine is that, and I guess it's because obviously I assume that per litre as it costs, because of the climate, it costs more per litre to produce wine here than sort of maybe in France. Or I'm just thinking of the price point, because when you go into the supermarket, a lot of people that are sort of just choosing and finding their way in the wine world, because they don't want to sort of, you know, if they like a bottle, they're probably prepared to pay for it. If they're just starting in the wine world, they don't want to splash out £15 on a bottle they're not sure they're going to like. So they tend to start at the lower end, and then I think at the lower end, that's probably English wine isn't sort of there. It's not in with the.
You're not going to get your 3 for 10 or 2 for 10 or anything like that. But I don't think that's anything we need to be remotely ashamed of. You know, when you look at wines from other countries like New Zealand, for example, and some wine regions in France and Italy, they wouldn't even begin to think about undercutting, or underselling. It's really important to understand that the quality that's in the bottle is something you have to pay for. And yes, of course, there's the issue with higher duty that you pay over here, but it's the same as any wine that you import. So, I think we're pretty unashamedly proud of some of the prices that we do charge. And going to the sparkling wine end, our top sparkling wines retail between 25 and 40. Actually, you've got some that are retailing now at £100.
Wow.
But actually, those that are in the 25 to 35 pound range still coming in cheaper than some of those good labels from Champagne.
Yes.
And other top sparkling wine producing regions.
Yes.
But then they're the ones that they're beating in competitions as well. So I don't think it's something we need to be quite so hung up about. It's about the quality.
Yes.
You want to buy, if you want to buy a really good cheddar, you expect to pay a little bit more for a proper Somerset farmhouse cheddar. The same will apply for a good quality English wine.
Yes, and I guess the other thing is that in terms of wine, the amount that you're actually paying for the wine is relatively the amount you get per litre of wine is relatively small for the price paid at the supermarket. By the time you've added on distribution and particularly alcohol, the tax there is on alcohol. I'm not sure. Is it only sort of like 10% of the?
It's a fixed rate, which at the moment is £2.26 a bottle.
Okay.
And we pay VAT on top of that as well.
Of course, yeah.
So yes, the margins, when you work it back from a retail price point in a supermarket, the amount going back to a grower is obviously much less than that.
Of course, yeah. Of course.
But I think it's also very important that people compare like with like. I mean, English vineyards are estate, the small estates, and if you compare that to small estates that are selling good quality wines across France, then the price points aren't actually that different.
No, and I agree. French wine automatically has a premium on it, doesn't it? As soon as it's French, automatically there's a pound or two added, or percentage added. So I can certainly understand. And I guess that if you are, as I understand it, with my dummy hat on, if you have grapes that are, you're not getting the same yield, i.e. the volume of juice, excuse me using layman terms, you're not getting the same juice out of the grapes, then obviously again the harvest you're going to be paying much more for whether one vine takes up the same room, whether it's producing hundreds of grapes or it produces 10. So again, I guess that has a sort of
I think our yields are actually pretty reasonable and comparable with other parts of the world, and the challenge is to actually control those. As a growing country, we are with very vigorous soils and a very good growing climate. The secret is to control the crop and actually get the right amount per acre for the product that you're trying to produce. So if you're trying to produce top quality sparkling wines, then you need to limit the crop to actually get the benefit in the quality of the grapes. If you're trying to produce a wine in much larger scale to sit on the supermarket shelves, then your growing techniques might be slightly different to get a slightly higher yield. So we can get the yields, it's just a question of controlling those yields in order to make sure we get the right quality.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
And then going on from that, probably the extra costs we have would come in with labour and things that are involved, where as a country we're probably higher in terms of labour costs than some of our competitors.
Yes, of course.
And the cost of land.
Oh, yes.
And all of these sort of things, when you start to put all of these things into the equation, then they can push the costs of growing up quite significantly.
Well, we're going to do a separate interview with Martin. I'd really like to get into that a little bit more. So we're going to talk about 3 quarters. So I'll do a link on this video to that video, and we can really get into what it's like growing wine here in England. In terms of the future for English and Welsh wine, is that you've mentioned sort of the amount of the increase in hectares? Is that increasing? Are we expecting that to go on?
Yes, we are. This year alone, we planted another 3 million vines. Last year we planted just over 1.5 million vines, and the year before that we planted 1 million vines. So we're seeing year on year growth. This really is becoming one of the future agriculture sectors of the industry, and it's something that we're really proud of. The beginning of last year, so that would be beginning of 2018, we released our first industry survey. We've just sort of merged into one new trade association called Wines of Great Britain, WineGB, and one of the first things we did was conduct a survey of our members, and we started to draw comparisons from what we knew we produced in the previous year and compare it to other wine regions that perhaps people might know quite well, like Oregon and Australia and the likes, and particularly Oregon is quite interesting because they were at the stage that we are at now 20 years ago. So we then looked at where they were 20 years on, and we put our own kind of predictions or aspirations to where we want to be in 20 years time based on the same rate of growth. And if that's the case, then in 20 years time we're going to be producing around 40 million bottles. Now at the time, last year, our average was around about 6 million bottles. Actually, we produced a record harvest last year of about 15 million, but 20 years time that'll be 40 million bottles.
Wow.
and that's going to yield an enormous, revenue for the Exchequer and for all sorts of things, and not least for the businesses themselves. And we were looking at all sorts of other things as well, but the impact of tourism on the regional economy and that sort of thing. And as Martin mentioned earlier on, you've got your carbon footprint now, and of course in the UK, just to put it into an even bigger context, we're going through the most fantastic food and drink revolution at the moment.
Yes.
I think we're really proud of what we're producing now. Food and drink is our biggest export as well. So that actually also furnishes all sorts of fantastic things in the future. We're starting to export English wine, which is great.
Really,
America is one of our key markets, which is
Really?
lovely.
Fantastic.
Australia, even into Europe as well, I'm
Really?
pleased to say.
Cool.
But everything bodes very positively if we continue at this rate of growth. You're going to see an awful lot more, in terms of English and Welsh wine, in the coming years.
Just to pick up, because I'm sure some viewers will be thinking, well, it's England, Wales, why isn't it Scotland? Is that just Scotland is just too far north?
I'm sure in time there's some geological studies will show that in about 40-50 years time, probably past when our careers are over,
You hope.
you hope,
Still not working
there
on
may be Manchester Merlot, and they'll be growing vines on the shores of Loch Ness. Who knows? It is starting to creep up, and there are in fact 2 or 3 vineyards in the borders of Scotland. They haven't yet produced yet, so it's
Right.
early days. It's still that little bit cooler.
Yeah.
Who knows what'll happen?
I mean, I think one of the things is the investment in terms of, if you just look at it as a business case, because you don't just sort of plant a vine and then next year it starts producing grapes and you start producing wine. I mean, how many years does it take from sort of planting to...
You get a small crop after 3 years.
Really?
But it'll be 5 years before you're up to a commercial crop, really.
Right.
And then you'd hope that the vines would last for 25, 30 years and maybe even beyond. But generally speaking, we replant on about 25 to 30 years.
Right. So that, I mean, for putting a business case to a bank manager is to say, if you were borrowing the money to do it, I want to do this. That must be really, really difficult in terms of saying, because most people do 5-year plans, which that's got to be based on, and actually after the first year, they're already changing their, third and fourth year, let alone their, 5th year. So yeah, it must be really difficult to get started. And is that a barrier? It must be.
It's a challenge, there's no doubt about it, but that's the other thing that we've seen in the industry, that people are now recognising what potential value there is in this industry. And actually, if you're producing sparkling wine and only sparkling wine, it's about sort of 7-8 years before you've got your first product to sell. So that's, you are talking, you're talking the long haul. But there's all sorts of other factors that are now starting to that people are being made aware of. The value of land, we were talking about land before, but the value of land potential for viticulture, because obviously you can't just plant vines anywhere and everywhere. It'd be useful, you need to do a scoping study to see whether the land is suitable. And the value of the tourism side of things, and actually just the fact that English wine and Welsh wine is a product that is selling, and there is a marketplace for it, and that's important for us, and that's something that we're really putting a lot of time and effort into, not just to sell here domestically, but actually also on the export market too.
Right, and I guess obviously people won't put this in a business plan because no one knows today, but Brexit in terms of duties and all that sort of stuff may have if it falls from your perspective, it might fall in the right way. That could increase people wanting to buy more from the homeland, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not in the business plan, really.
No.
Is it?
Well, based on the fact that the government don't seem to know what's going on at the moment,
How can you?
I think we'd be second guessing at the moment, wouldn't we?
Or third or fourth, I think. Yeah.
I think we've got a lovely product that we've got here on our doorstep that people can come and enjoy. Whether you're visiting, and let's face it, if you're travelling from Gloucestershire to say Oxfordshire, you're a tourist as well.
Yes.
As much as encouraging inbound tourists as well.
Yeah, and what do you know the idea? You may not. It's a difficult question to answer. We've mentioned the tourism. What sort of percentage of vineyards, and how would people find out, if they're in a particular area where there is a vineyard to visit?
It's really exciting because it's quite early days. Not many vineyards are as established as, say, Three Quires, who've been, in the tourism business for a very long time. But what we're seeing, and it's starting in the south particularly, but I'm noticing it in all sorts of regions around the country, we're getting clusterings of vineyards that are geographically close to each other. And they've started to form subgroups. So we've got the vineyards of Hampshire, we've got the Wine Garden of England, which is down in Kent, we've got a Dorset Trail, we've got stuff going on in Cornwall, in Worcestershire, Herefordshire as well. And gradually they're working more and more with the local tourism groups to help promote the fact that they've got them. We are in the process of updating our website so that it's going to be much more focused on tourism, so that you can sort of map out where you are, because after all, if you want to, if you're going down to Brighton for a weekend, it'd be nice to know that there are vineyards around there. You can do a little trail. Yeah. There are now wine tour operators that are doing tours so that you can go on an organised one, and actually the individual vineyards promote themselves extremely effectively in what they have to offer and where you can come and visit.
Yeah, well, I certainly noticed it with your vineyard, so that I don't know how many miles was out, but I was already getting signs for 3 quarters. Wow, this must be a big place, because it must have been about 6 or 8 miles out, and I was starting to get signposted here. So yeah, well, that's fantastic. So in terms of the English, is the English crop as reliable because of our notorious weather? Is it as reliable as other countries? Because in France they tend to get the same sort of weather. I guess in Champagne area maybe not, but in the south of France they get the same area. And I'm just wondering whether the weather being so dramatically different from month to month, let alone year to year, it is like you're now biting. Every year's now biting as to whether you're going to get a crop.
I think it's the same for all farmers. You start off with a full basket and you're full of optimism, and you go through the season and bits fall off along the way. We have 3 main areas that we sort of worry about. First one is spring frosts, where in fact if you're planting in the right places, we're no worse off than most of Northern Europe. So it's a farming risk that's well accepted. We then like some nice warm weather through flowering, and that's probably the area where we are most at risk, because that can give you quite a large variability in the potential in the vineyard. But I think over the years we've learned to cope with that. You learn to cope with it through pruning techniques, through canopy control through the summer. So there's always a crop there, and our variation in crops is far lower now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. So right. I think that's experience and knowledge coming through into the viticultural sector.
Okay. One question that I'm sure that viewers, depending on whereabouts they are, but the very beginning, there's someone that's just starting their wine tasting journey. If they were to look for an English wine, is there any particular type of grape, or any particular type that they should aim for as something that will give, what I'm trying to say there is that obviously when you're beginning, your palate hasn't developed, so you can't get the subtleties. So there's no point in spending an awful lot of money, because you're just not going to appreciate it. So as a starting point, is there any particular type of grape or that someone should look for? Oh, that's a difficult question, I can tell.
Where do you start?
You'll get a 3 quarters bias if you ask me. I mean, I think it's fair to say that obviously there's a huge amount of talk about English sparkling wines at the moment, and Julia's mentioned the classic varieties that are around, but they tend to command a slightly higher price.
Yep.
You can find cheaper English traditional method sparkling wines, slightly less if you go for varieties like Céval Blanc, which were the traditional varieties we started off with when we started our sparkling wines. And if you're not going for sparkling wines, then the variety that people are talking about mostly is Bacchus.
Okay.
As a still wine variety, some people would say it's the English Sauvignon Blanc. It's got that freshness and the zestiness that you'd expect from an English wine. But there are areas of the world that have made their reputation through blending, and
yes.
I think that blending is an art form in the winery that shouldn't be underestimated.
No.
And you can get more consistency, complexity, and so you shouldn't feel that an English wine that doesn't have the varieties on it is inferior. It's actually made to be balanced, and in fact, to a certain extent, we avoid putting varieties on because the varieties don't mean anything to the consumer.
No.
So our wines, for example, will have names that don't relate to the varieties. The British public find it a lot easier to have names that they recognise, and they can read up all about the varieties on the back label. but I wouldn't be put off by varieties not being on the label.
No.
The wine will still be good.
Yeah, okay.
And I think a lot of it actually also is brand recognition.
Yes.
So Three Quires is now a known brand, and so if you see the Three Quires label, you know it's been made to the standards that Three Quires would expect to produce,
Yeah.
whether they're a single varietal or a blend. And after all, champagne is a blended wine, isn't it? Let's not forget that.
Yeah, true.
Martin's absolutely right. One great variety that we're finding is being more and more embraced by wine drinkers is Bacchus, and it's a lovely name after all, and so it's something that you can look out for. There's a bit of Bacchus grown in Germany, but I think it's really found its home here. I mentioned before that supermarkets and off licenses are now selling English wine, and you've got the endorsement of the shop that you go to as well.
Yes.
So that's, if you're starting out wanting to try an English wine,
Yep.
and you shop regularly at a certain supermarket or off-license chain or whatever, go and talk to them. Go and pick up a bottle of wine that they've either put their own brand on, their
Yes.
own label on, or one of the brands that they're selling, and that's a great place to start, because you know that that's been through a pretty rigorous selection process to actually make it onto the shelves.
Yeah.
And if you just want to make that first move, I mentioned independent wine merchants, and from time to time, you know, they really get behind the wines that they stock, and I'm a great advocate of independent wine merchants, because you know that those wines have also been hand selected, and if you're lucky, they might be doing some in-store tastings, and that's a great way to start
Yes,
to
of
taste English wines.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But really, you were saying earlier about there being so many vineyards around now, and most of them open to the public.
Yeah.
Best thing to do is to get down to a vineyard, and you can try 4 or 5 different wines, and you'll
Absolutely.
soon then
Know if you like it or not. Yeah, yeah.
what varieties and styles suit you.
Yeah.
Because everybody's talking about English wine as being one wine at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, and our challenge, I think, is to actually let people realise that there are regional differences, there are varietal differences, and actually there are English wines that you like and English wines that maybe you don't so much.
Absolutely.
Of course, yeah.
And that's our challenge. Are you talking about wines being in the on-trade a little bit more now, and hotels and restaurants quite often will have an English wine on the list. I feel our challenge now is to get 2 or 3 English wines
agree.
on the list, and then people can choose which ones they prefer.
And having them by the glass as well. That's one of
Absolutely.
our big challenges.
Yes.
Or, you know, one of the things that we really are working quite hard on is to try and encourage more restaurants and bars and hotels to actually serve English wines and by the glass. Then it's a very affordable way of
Well, absolutely, because
learning.
you're exactly that, because people don't want to sort of
Yeah.
splash out on a bottle just to find they don't like it, and
Yeah.
are too embarrassed to send it back if they taste it and say I don't like it. So yeah, that's an excellent excellent way. Are there any regional sort of you know, like you have in Europe, you have the you know, the area that you have to meet certain conditions to be able to get the appellation? Is it called?
yeah, well, we've got it's a Europe-wide thing, which is the Protected Designation of Origin
Right.
and Protected Geographical Indicator, PDO, PGI. And at the moment there's one for England and there's one for Wales, but there are 2 PDOs that are now in the process. One is down in Cornwall for a single vineyard, Camel Valley, so that's very much like your Grand Cru in many ways.
Okay.
It's 4 wines produced from a particular grape variety, Bacchus, from a particular vineyard, and that vineyard is protected.
Oh wow.
But there's an initiative down in Sussex to where they've tightened up the regulations for PDO, so that if you want to put the word Sussex on your label, you have to have gone through the appropriate qualitative wine production and tasting as well. At the moment, I mean, it's interesting. Martin mentioned regional differences, and I'm certainly picking up regional differences in the same grape variety being grown in different areas. There's no, it's not like France in that you know that Bordeaux is, you're going to get a certain type and certain grape varieties. It's still, you know, we're still very young really, and so we're starting to establish really those differences a bit, aren't we?
Yeah.
Now, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent.
But most of the wines that are sold have been through a PGI or a PDO status, and that's not a bad thing to look for on a label if you're buying a bottle of wine. That means that it's been through a pretty vigorous testing procedure
Yeah.
before it's hit the marketplace.
Hi guys, I'm sorry about that abrupt finish there, but I think the amount of information we got from Julia and Martin was tremendous. An awful lot going on there. Hope you enjoyed it. As in, apologies for the abrupt ending, but I hope it didn't spoil your enjoyment of this. We'll see you on the next one. Chin chin.
Chin chin.